All right, episode one. Meghin Williams, thank you for joining us. General Manager of Cal Women's Basketball, the first General Manager for Cal Women's Basketball, hired back in April. Meghin, thank you for coming on. Thank you for being guest number one. Let me toss this out at you. Give us kind of a 30-second zigzag bio that got you to this point. But then the big question is, what is the state of college athletics as we see it right now?
Yeah, awesome. Well, first of all, thanks for having me in episode one. That's a big deal. I feel very honored. But yeah, I started in collegiate athletics almost 10 years ago now. Um, Went to the University of Nebraska Lincoln, played 4 years. Took an extra lap because that was back when you could say you can't take a class because it's during our practice block. And then got my master's degree from the University of Nebraska while being a graduate assistant coach. That was kind of my first entry into college athletics. Left my graduate assistantship to become the director of ops at Princeton. That was when Courtney Banghart was at Princeton. Won an Ivy League championship on her staff there. Then left and actually became an assistant AD for internal operations at UNC Greensboro. Was there for about 9 months. And then Courtney took the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill job. And she called me, said she wanted me to be back on her staff, said it was really important to her. And so I became the director of operations and assistant to the athletic director at UNC. For about 2 years, I was in that role, and then I got upgraded to a director of operations and unofficially more of a chief of staff role. Technically, they're not allowed to have that title, but just took on a lot more leadership responsibility, and then left that position to start my own consulting business where I was working with athletic departments, had a brief stop at Huddle, and then got back into the craziness as the chief of staff at Virginia Tech. Was there for a year, and then Charmin called me to come back to the West Coast, which is where I'm from. And so now I am the general manager at Cal. Ooh, lots of stops. To answer your
Which should tell you that's why you are guest number one, because I and we'll get into it, but the unique titles, the unique roles, which is kind of teeing up that first question of the state of the game and state of college athletics, and kind of eventually getting to where we're going. But you've worn such unique titles that is the future.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I listened to an interview with Gino. It's an older interview, but he essentially said we're in an age where we are acting as if we are a professional sport and a professional landscape, but still with so many different restrictions and the inability to have athletes buy out of their contracts, and just still so much responsibility in the student athlete's hands. So I think we're really at an inflection point, and we'll see where we get in the next 2 years, whether is football just going to branch off on its own? Are we going to just turn into two different conferences with different regions, almost like more of like an NFL-ish model? So I think we're on the precipice of seeing us really go into more of a professional space, and you're kind of seeing athletic directors have to make decisions that look a lot more like the professional space as we cut sports to make more money for the revenue generating sports. And so I think it's exciting. I think that the ability for the student athletes to make money off their name, image, and likeness is important. But I think the decisions that need to be made with that, and they are now in a space where they are making money and we are paying them essentially for play, whether we want to call it that or not. We just need to take ownership of that and really move in that direction so that there's equal opportunity on the university's end as it is on the athlete's end.
I was speaking to Pam Walker, who we know, and Yvonne Sanchez yesterday separately, but the nostalgia of what college athletics used to be is just no longer. Yep. And I think those coaches, those administrators, those athletes who are getting into it now, this is their nostalgia. This will become their nostalgia. So talk a little bit about your role. What are some misconceptions of the general manager role, but also how are you, Coach Sharman, and your staff maneuvering through this landscape, or this unparalleled landscape that we've had?
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing about these roles as you see them pop up is everyone's handling them differently. Our university specifically, and when Sharman and I sat down and talked about this position, because I mean, we talked, she's been trying to hire me for 6 years and she is very outward with that. And we've always talked about what a position like this would look like. I also talked to my past mentors like Courtney Banghart about what they were doing with their general manager position and how that's evolved. And so I think Sharman and I really landed on treating this like it is in the professional space, partially because that's where I want my career to go, but also because, again, I believe we are headed toward a professional model. So how do we get as close as we can to that now before that shift happens? And so with that, we've determined I'm a part of evaluating talent, usually on the latter end of our recruiting process, but I also did a ton of international recruiting this summer. At one point I was gone for like 20 days. And so some of that was to get, some access to seeing these international kids because our roster is heavy international base, but also to have a brief moment to kind of get an understanding of who the agents are, who are the key players that we need to know over in the international space so that when the transfer portal come times, it's not their first time hearing my name and I'm just talking to them about money. So it's starting to establish that relationship early on. So we took that as an opportunity for me to get eyes on kids and also to start to build those relationships that we're going to need come the end of season. I think aside from that, I'm in charge of all of our revenue generation. So the external sits under me. I deal with our ticketing office. I deal with our marketing. And then I'm in charge of development, right? We have to raise some of this money to get these kids. So it's a lot of different avenues outside of just overall roster management and strategic planning alongside Sharman. But it's a really cool position and I'm excited, and it's been a whirlwind of the last 5 months.
Now, where is like the football model, the pro model, like where is that coming into the same lane for you all, or are you looking at one over the other? Because obviously, you brought up UNC, they went full into the football GM model. So where are you with it in terms of professional, but then also where football is, and it has kind of taken the lead on the whole NIL and collective space?
Yeah, I think it's a merge. I think you have to be honest about where you are, right? So here we've done a very, very good job of advocating that although we're headed into this professional model, we aren't football. We're not generating the numbers that football is generating. We're not throwing out the numbers that football is throwing out. And we actually want to be handled very differently because of that. And so I think although we look at our football team and look at the things that we're doing, we had a lot of conversations with our senior associate director of NIL, which is Justin Datula, and the work that he's doing with our lawyers, because our contracts very much fit the football model. There's certain terminology and certain parts of our contract that are more in line with the football season than it is the basketball season. And so we've had a lot of conversations of like, this works for football, this doesn't work for us. These type of issues, people aren't necessarily not playing in the middle of our season if they're available to play because our rosters are smaller and because they want the ability to transfer, whereas football, they can do that a little bit more. And so we've taken a lot of time to model our contracts to fit our sport, but I still think we take a lot of guidance from what football and men's basketball are doing. I just had a meeting with their GM and who leads the recruiting strategy in men's basketball to kind of talk through like they want buyouts in our contracts. They want these type of things. And Sharman and I had to decide like, are those also things we want, or is that a knock against us with the way that we have to recruit and with having less revenue to recruit on our side than they do?
Yeah. So talk about the revenue piece of it. Is the revenue or what is the sentiments of your donors as it relates to this new landscape versus the old model? Hey, I want to help with locker room space, capital projects. So how have you maneuvered that? Not just maybe at Cal, but previously. What are these new donors, or not new donors? What are the donors now thinking about this new way of fundraising?
Yeah, I think the fundraising model has changed in that way. In a lot of instances, my time at Virginia Tech, we had three different buckets where, one is a capital projects account, one is your donor kind of relations account, and then there's another account that's like special projects, or what most schools are doing now is discretionary funds. So here at Cal, we've just created a discretionary fund and everything's going into that bucket. Now, if we have a donor that comes to us and is like, I only want to give to capital projects, I don't believe in revenue share, I don't believe in NIL, which we do. A lot of our donors are older, and I think we see that across the board. Then we'll earmark that money to go specifically to what they're asking for. But outside of that, we're now putting it all into the same bucket, and then we can use it at our discretion. And a lot of my conversations are that, like, hey, we just need money and we need money for this, we need money for that. But at the end of the day, we just need money. We're in the middle of a capital project for our locker room. But also, if we have this kid come in and we need to pay them this amount of money, that money might get funneled there. So the discretionary fund really allows Charmin and I and our administration to use the money strategically to what's going to benefit our program at that moment, which I think has been super helpful in terms of being able to kind of move money around, especially with the new guidance that's kind of trying to limit collectives with NIL Go and things like that.
Yeah, and I always thought you've been a forward thinker in the sense of how you cultivate and steward those donors and really just community members, because the conversion of fans to donors, that's one of the hardest things to do.
Mhm.
What's your daily look like as a general manager?
Depends on the day. It's a lot of meetings. I am usually in anywhere from 3 to 7 meetings a day. And so I think some of it is just collecting information to take to Charmin and be like, here's where we're at with this. Are you interested in this? A lot of vendor meetings right now. We have a lot of events outside of just our normal events. We have a block party, we have a race for change. A lot of things that Charmin's just really interested in. We host a Raising the Bar Invitational, which is a tournament that we host. So a lot of my time right now in this part of the season is trying to get vendors, trying to get performers so that we can really create an experience for our fans to turn them into donors, to turn more just regular students into fans. And then I think in the summer, it's a lot more about contract negotiations, meeting with agents, getting through the transfer portal. Once the transfer portal's done and we have our team on campus, focusing on our team, brand building meetings, what NIL deals do you want me to go after, things like that. So it really depends on the part in the season. Heavy development meetings in the summer, and development trips. Now we're kind of trickling into creating development trips around our schedule. So when we go to Virginia, who do we have in Virginia that doesn't get to touch the Bears very often? What full donor scope trip can we take? We're going to Paris to start the season. So who's coming with us to Paris? How can we create an experience for them? So it really depends on the day, but a lot of it's depending on this part of the season as well.
And you talked about, some of the new ways of touching donors.
Mhm.
What would be one of the biggest changes, I guess, in terms of what you're doing as a staff? Because and I'm going to bring up that title as chief of staff. I think that it's a political term. It's a business term. Where does that hat of experience comes into how you're managing even the new conversations that your staff has to have, or that the other assistants have to have in terms of the recruiting process? What are you all doing that is maybe leading the way of changing the old model to now this model in terms of those conversations?
Yeah, I think I've been really lucky in my career because I have had very strong and opinionated women who have given me space to create at the table. And so when I look at Courtney Banghart, um, I also give myself credit because I have an extreme amount of emotional intelligence, which allows me to connect with a lot of different people, which allows me to be able to help manage a staff. I establish individual relationships so that right off the bat, we have some type of connecting point that I can go back to when I have to have hard conversations. And so, one, I think I've been lucky because my the people that have led me, the head coaches I have worked for, really have used me in those positions to help them lead. I think the other thing is being able to have hard conversations in a really respectful way. And I think I've learned that over time. I wouldn't say I was good at it early in my career. I was kind of a spark plug and over emotional. But I think as I've gained experience and had to have more hard conversations and been in these leadership roles, it's a direct line. At the end of the day, all of the work that I do is relationship based. That's from a donor standpoint, that's from NIL deals, that's from conversations with our student athletes about their brand. It all comes down to a relationship and a level of trust that has to be built. And I always keep that in the forefront of my mind. I think it's really hard in development cases to just go ask for money if there's no established relationship. So when I first took the job as chief of staff at Virginia Tech, I remember my first day, I had like 10 meetings set up, and half of them were with donors that were really important just to start to establish the relationship. Your ask isn't till 9, 10 touches down the line. And I think for a lot of people, that's hard to conceptualize. But it's like, do you know their kids? Have you mentioned their kids? Have you brought up their kids? We had a donor that went into the hospital. I went to visit him. Like, at the end of the day, you have to have a true care for people. And I think that has been able to allow me to expand in the chief of staff role to be able to manage people, but also to build these relationships. A Virginia Tech donor reached out to me this morning just to check in and see if I was going to connect with Liz while she was out here because she just got signed to the Valkyries. So I think just keeping the relationship base in whatever part of this job is the biggest and most helpful tool that I've been able to use throughout the entirety of my career.
That's a great segue because I think that's a few years ago, I spoke at the Final Four about recruiting and laying the fundraising terms on top of the recruiting terms. And it's just a different term, but it's a lot like recruiting where you have to establish that line of trust before an ask can even happen. And if you do it right, do you actually have to ask? You most of the time you have the donor asking, like, where do you need me? How can I help? Now, with that being said, and some of the buckets of the recruiting side, so you got the international recruiting, you got the high school recruiting, but you also have the portal recruiting and the retainment. How have your NIL discussions or those members of the community, perhaps business leaders, where are those discussions in terms of retaining players versus the recruitment of a player and where those monies come together?
Yeah, I think most of our player retention comes from our donor base. And I think that's been a really good strategy considering the donors are usually in women's basketball fans. Like, they come to the games, they're loyal, they will travel for you. And so we really use that as the ability to be like, hey, like, we need to keep this so and so, like, we have to keep her on our roster, but this is how much that's going to cost, right? And that's just that's the that's the space that we're living in. And so I think they now have an understanding, and usually our donors that are current really want to give to the players that they've fallen in love with and gotten to know and been at events with. And so that then leaves us a lot of our revenue share bucket to go after the other players. Now, the international space, and specifically the transfer portal, is really different. I think a lot of the recruitment for the transfer portal honestly is happening now. And I don't mean happening now in a way of tampering. I mean happening now in the way that you are recruiting these players coming out of high school. They remember if you were their first call, and it might not mean you're going to necessarily get the kid, but it puts you in the door and it gives you a starting point when the kid hits the transfer portal to be like, hey, do you remember me? I recruited you in. I know your family. I know your mom. I know your dad. Like going back into your notes and having substantial conversations with these kids now, I think is super helpful, because usually if they're in the transfer portal, there's some type of mistrust with the decision that they made the first time. So having a backing of trust the second time around. And then I usually come in on the back end of the conversations to talk money, but I think also letting your culture speak for itself. We've been really lucky here. Charmin's established a culture that really hasn't been centered around the money, and the ability to have my position, and my position is the only one that speaks about the money. No one else on our staff speaks about the money. That really keeps the organic nature of why we got into it for our coaches and our coaching staff. And I also think it helps them not put a dollar sign to the kid. If you know a kid is making $275 and they miss every single layup, thinking that that's not going to resonate with you psychologically, and you'd be like, what the heck? Like, we're paying you this amount of money, you know? And at the end of the day, we're technically not in the professional space. So we try to keep it really organic in that way. But I think the transfer portal is a beast on its own. And I think there's a lot that needs to be figured out in that space. And I'm just not sure if or when we're going to get there, but it's craziness right now.
I've been fortunate to work with Charmin on a lot of the WBCA task force and the different committees that the WBCA has to offer. And the one thing you said this earlier, where her culture from the outside, it really does lean towards the service first, and then now with some of the organization and the organic things that you are doing, your role, your conversations, you can now see it on the court, with the successes that are happening. Now, where's your administration on this? And maybe not so much your administration, but administrations across the country are now having to figure this thing out as well and make the tough decisions. And on top of football always making money for conferences and schools, men's basketball always making money for conferences and schools, but there's a new player in town. Women's basketball is now making money for conferences and schools. So where has your administration supported? What's the talk of the landscape from administrators that that the money that women's basketball can now bring to the table? What does that mean to the return of that investment?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Our administration just went through kind of an overhaul. So our athletic director, Jim Knowlton, retired maybe about 3 months ago now, late July. And our Chancellor Lyons, decided to go into a co-athletic director model. So we now have a co-athletic director model where we have 2 athletic directors. And then kind of trickle down of leadership. We actually got the new org chart yesterday. So I'm interested to see one of the co-athletic directors, Jenny, was our oversight. So I think we're a little bit lucky from that standpoint, because she's been able to hear the hums and the haws that we've had over the past few years. And she's also been able to see where women's basketball is right now. I think with that, we feel a pretty good level of support. At the end of the day, I think administrations are being forced to really make their coaches, GMs, and the leadership in each of these programs sit down and fully distinguish their priorities in a way that they never have before. I think what your priorities has always been important. However, now you have to trickle it down even more. So you can't have 6. What are your top 3 priorities? And tell me what those are, and I'll get you there. But the other 3, 4, 7 that we all have, that's capital projects or a foreign tour, right? You see the foreign tours they're going away. Yeah. And that's because we're being forced to truly figure out what our priorities are. Because at the end of the day, they still do have to support the football programs and the men's basketball programs. So I think that's the biggest shift that I've seen, is that in the past we were able to have 7, 8 priorities and they all truly matter, and us truly being able to funnel them out. Now, I mean, even for us here, so our chancellor does a match to get us to our million. So we raise 500 and then he matches the rest, and next year it'll be a new number. But I think with that, you're seeing, yeah, if I have to raise 500,000, then that's not going to a capital project. I don't know if we can take a foreign tour. And so it's even within our office. I think Charmin and I have a lot of really tough conversation, and that's kind of good cop, bad cop, where she really is still advocating for the student athlete experience, still advocating for foreign tours, still advocating for some of our kids to have a home game in their home state. And I really have to push her in a direction of like, hey, these kids matter, and we're not going to go back to taking away bagels and cream cheese like the old compliance days. But some of these things we're just not going to be able to do, and we have to be okay with that to build a roster to get back to the Final Four.
That's so good. I mean, first the 2 athletic director model, the oversight. Hopefully that helps with the ear that you can be in constantly. Now, where does the fundraising officers within the athletic department, are they in charge of that match side? Are they, like, is there a number, or is there a working relationship or strategy meetings that you have with them as it relates to not only your donors, but, I mean, fundraisers hate to say or to hear no, right? Like, you can't touch that donor, or you can't touch it. Like, where does that coexistence come into play?
Yeah, so I think that our administration has done a fantastic job of telling our development office that women's basketball is a priority. And so I meet weekly with our direct development officer, and then Beth, who's over our entire development. She's senior executive, associate athletic director, all the titles. But she's been fantastic. And we have another partner in Southern California, Lindsay Webster, who also overseas. So we pretty much have a 3 female development team that I work alongside with. And when my position came in, I used a lot of my tactics from the past. So we've gone to Chicago and done some with their gift officer. So I think the good thing is our gift officer has a great relationship with the rest of the gift officers. So even when you run into those, oh, this is my donor, everyone's priority right now is women's basketball on Cal's campus. And so I think there's a big push. I think we have a lot of support. I think at the end of the day, it just comes to getting in front of the right people. And so we're being included in football events. I'm sitting next to Ron Rivera, our football GM, and we're having conversations, and we're pulling other donors into other sports. So I think that we've been supported in that way. I don't know if it's always like that. I think I've worked at universities where women's basketball has been a priority. You look at Virginia Tech and the numbers that they bring out audience-wise for the women's basketball team, felt super supported there. Same for UNC. So I think across the board, I've been really lucky because I've worked at institutions that see the value in women's basketball right off the bat. Not to say that there aren't things that we are challenged with or battle with, but I'm really happy with our support here.
So you're the first general manager for women's basketball at Cal. You're seeing these titles pop up across the country, all, men's and women's basketball, football. A lot of areas, they are still the coach that has to manage this. So what have you learned in your short time on the job that, an aspiring GM or a coach who wants to transition into that, what are some skill sets that people can maybe start working on that they have to have in 5 years because of the changing landscape?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think, again, the emotional intelligence piece, which I don't know if you can learn that, but it takes me very far. Even when you talk about being on an agent call, I can feel the shifts in their emotion. I can kind of feel when someone's more of a money grab, like we're going to have to be the highest bidder, or we're not getting this kid, versus, oh, this person actually cares about where this kid is going and like if they're able to play. And I think specifically in the transfer portal, we saw heavy kids said they wanted to play and then they went places where they were going to be third or fourth off the bench. Marquee programs, but you're not going to play. So what you told us isn't necessarily true. So I think the emotional intelligence piece, relationship building, always, organization. I think truly you're running a business now. So I actually think that director of operations and chief of staff and people who have an administrative background to a certain degree are helpful. I always tell assistants and associate head coaches that there are a lot of ways that I am actually more prepared to run a program than they are because it doesn't come down to X's and O's. The X's and O's is the 5% of a head coach's job. And this is because I work directly with the head coach. I've had a lot of input in our strategic decisions that have moved our program forward. And so I've been a part of the conversations that are going to our athletic director to advocate for money for our program, go to our donors to advocate for money for our program. Those are the things that are now instrumental in creating a top program. And so I think that being able to take on some of those tasks that you don't think are important, or asking your head coaches to be a part of conversations that have to do with budget, that have to do with development, taking ownership of those areas, because that is the job now. Head coaches are turning more into the athletic directors who are sitting in meetings and going through contracts. And it's a lot less of the fun stuff unless you have this type of position in place that can take on the brunt of a lot of that. But I think the director of ops role is shifting now, but I think these chief of staff and general manager roles are truly preparing you for this administrative side that is so necessary to be successful in this landscape. If you can go and sit in on legal classes and learn about contracts and contract negotiations, like all of that is equipping you in this space. And I think people think contract negotiations and they get all flustered. I mean, a lot of times in my position, our number is our number. There's a little bit of wiggle room that we create, but it's not like we're going back and we're like, we're going to offer you a car. And if we could offer that, we're offering that from the beginning to get the kid. So I think people are overcomplicating it in their mind, but you do have to be able to have tough conversations. I'm not always the most liked on our staff because I'm having these money conversations and kids think they're worth more and parents think they're worth more. So I think that's part of it too, just developing a thick skin and knowing like my job is to do what's right for the program in the same way that Charmin's job is that. And so the outliers and not being the favorite is kind of this role. So if you want the fluffy good stuff, you should stay in the assistant and the associate head role, coaching role. But I mean, it's awesome and it's a good place to be right now.
Where are you with salary caps? Because that's kind of a talking point now. Mm-hmm. Where are you with, some of the inflated numbers that are happening? But I kind of get it. Like it's coming because these agents are taking such a huge percentage of the cut. Like, where are you on that? How are you maneuvering those aspects of your conversation, since you are the one having those conversations with your athletes and the agents?
Yeah, I think the salary cap piece is really difficult right now. I think there's not enough statistical data to represent how much a 4-star guard versus how much a 5-star guard, because the numbers have been astronomical with the collectives and truly a lot of them have been false. But some of them aren't. Some people are offering $500,000 to certain kids. And so I think it's just so sporadic right now that it's kind of impossible for us to create kind of this salary cap model. I think ideally, and when I was at Virginia Tech, I talked to the chief of staff of the football team a lot. He was a fantastic resource. I think ideally, yeah, you would like to get to a point where it's more standardized, where it's like freshmen are going to make up to this much. And I think we're trying to do that to an extent here. But then there's the outliers, right? You're talking about even on our team, like the Puff Morris, right? She comes in with a lot of accolades. She was McDonald's All-American. So I think ideally we would like to get to a point where we are using that model. And I think I've met with a lot of WNBA GMs to kind of see where theirs are ironing out and how we can get to that place. I just don't think we're there yet. And I think it would require a certain level of honesty across the board in our sport that people aren't willing to divulge because we're still trying to have the one up, right? So if we're able to offer this much and this is how we're getting it in, I don't know if we're going to get there. And I think a lot of shoe brands are now getting more heavily involved because of the type of numbers that are coming out. So I think what you're going to see in the next few years is for these marquee players, they're going to continue to have all of their deals outside of the revenue share space. And then the revenue share money is going to be more for the players that aren't necessarily marquee yet, and can't get those bigger name brand deals to hop on board. But I think the Learfields are becoming a lot more important in the space just because they have more access to those bigger brands to bring them to the table to support the recruiting that we're doing.
And you're seeing a lot more teams jumping shoe brand to shoe brand, and then now these shoe brands are now, they're on top of an NIL deal for that particular school or program. So at what point are we going to see, a company's logo on the chest, much like professional athletes do outside of probably football, NFL, but like you're seeing these patches, like, is that, you think that's a direction that we're going to go, or like where is that money?
Yeah.
When is that going to come into play?
Yeah, I think that's just like a significant amount of money that's going to have to be put into play. I haven't dove as much into the licensing space, but I know licensing is a big piece of all of that. And so, I mean, I think we're inching toward it all. I think we're inching toward all of the pieces of the professional model. I don't know if there's enough return on investment quite yet, from our side for the brands to take that leap and really be logoing us. I think for some sports, it might, from some teams across the board, it might start just from a winning tradition in those at those universities. But I don't know if we're quite there yet.
Yeah. So last few questions. I appreciate the time that you're investing in this. Where's Title IX in this? How can we protect the equity side of these decisions, both as sport managers, but also administrators? Like, how do we protect the law, first of all? How do we protect women? How do we protect the sports that women play at the same time that the pro model's coming, money is here? What should we be thinking about? Where's the advocacy?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think we've pondered that quite a bit.
Yeah.
I think that with the roster cap changes and things like that, that's kind of some of the ways that they're trying to mitigate the Title IX piece. From my understanding, at most universities, as they cut sports, that is something that is taken into consideration so that you're still keeping that balance. But I think at the end of the day, that's why I say, are we inching toward like a 2-conference, multiple region model? Are we inching toward a just overall professional sport model, football breaking off so that they're no longer involved? Because I think that's where you're getting to, even just from a support lens. It's becoming more like the Olympic sport and revenue generating sport divide has gotten so big. And I think that directly impacts Title IX when you look at it that way.
Yeah. All right. Last question. I got a finish this type of question that we're going to be asking all of our guests. But before I do, I just want to acknowledge our friendship. I just love watching you maneuver this profession, this sport. I think you are the face of the future. I think you have so many skill sets and titles and experiences and expertise that can actually shape the future of college athletics. So, on that note, the future of college athletics is blank because blank.
Oof, that's a good one. Good question.
And for all you fundraisers or coaches who want to be fundraisers, you got to be uncomfortable with the silence.
Yeah, yeah.
You're going to force the answer
Let
that
people
way.
think. The future of college athletics is exciting because of the ability to innovate. I think that's how you have to look at it.
I love it. I love it. Well, Meghin, thank you for coming on. For those of you who are watching, please subscribe. This podcast, this platform is just that. It's big talk, big think, forward thinking for the future of college athletics for both administrators, coaches, and all those who care. So thanks for joining us, and we will be back with another episode.
Thank you.